I guess I have one major question for you, plus a few others. Is Zapier safe?
Oh, that's a part one right off the bat. Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite, Shiva. You know what? This is the question that I was asking myself when I was a Zapier user. I worked at a company called LogMeIn. You know, they had LastPass, GoToMeeting, and a bunch of other stuff. And I was a heavy Zapier user. I was always wondering, well, how they keep my data safe. So actually, that was the reason why I even started to interview for this position. I wasn't looking. Zapier had a head of security open, and the recruiter reached out to me. Oh, this is my chance to dig deeper and learn how they store my data. So, and you know, the culture really got me. So I ended up here. I joined almost 3 years ago, and I'm absolutely happy. Now, going back to your question, is Zapier safe? I like to believe so, and really for 3 reasons. One is we have a structured program in place, you know, to look through as holistically as possible, you know, starting from application security, like trying not to introduce new bugs into our systems, but also find the existing ones, you know, both through static analysis, dynamic analysis. But the most important one is a bug bounty program. I think that's the best, you know, best money, best place to spend money, bug bounties. And then on the infrastructure side, you know, we have a cloud security program, which is focusing on, okay, are we building, you know, our stuff on solid ground, right? So, you know, are we doing the necessary best practices for our environment, whether that's AWS or something else. And then, of course, you know, we can say that we are safe, but it always sounds better when we have somebody externally, you know, proving that or, you know, saying something about it. So that's why we actually last year had our first SOC 2 Type 2 compliance audit, and we're doing red teaming every year with a third party and pen testing. So that's kind of helping us to prove that, yeah, what we thought is you know, is the good place to be, it actually confirmed by others. And then, of course, you know, probably one of the most important part of a security program is detection and response. So we keep working, especially using our findings from our red team exercises, focusing on, okay, where are our blind spots? You know, where do we need to, you know, implement more detection, more logging, more alerts? So kind of with these, I said 3 things, but it's actually 4 things. I would say that we have the right things in place to call Zapier safe, I guess.
Yeah. One of the really interesting things I found out about Zapier recently was you guys are 100% remote.
Yeah. Yeah. And the company was actually founded like that back in 2011. So I think actually we had an office back then. Well, the 3 founders were living together, but it was like just for a couple of months. But yeah, since then we don't have an office anywhere. We have a PO box somewhere in San Francisco, I guess, but no actual physical office.
The reason I ask, and the reason why I'm very interested in that, is because with no physical office, you're not really going to catch a lot of flack for saying this, but you almost don't have to care about that east-west traffic on an internal network.
And that is a big relief.
And it's a major attack surface that has just been taken out of play. But you have the unenviable task of securing a 100% remote workforce. How does that look? And if you don't want to give certain details that allow the bad guys to come knocking on the door, I understand that. But whatever you can share.
Of course. Yeah, it definitely has its, you know, positives and negatives. You're right. You know, not having an office network, not having to deal with, you know, east to west traffic is absolutely a big plus. You know, we don't have, you know, unpatched security cameras in our offices that, you know, can be an entry point to our network.
They only send traffic to China, so it's okay.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So we don't have, you know, Active Directory. We don't have all that jazz. So that's a plus. But you're absolutely right. Instead, you know, we have almost 600 employees with their own Wi-Fi network, which we have no control over, right? So it's kind of another tricky area. So in that case, what we focus on is two things. One is access control. So I've seen other companies who went remote and basically just built a huge VPN. So kind of rebuilding the office in the cloud. And we try to not do that. So we do have a VPN, but it's only used for very few things. And we actually trying to get rid of it and make.
I absolutely hate VPNs. Yeah. When my clients went remote, I bent over backwards to not have any type of VPN because that's just like a big red sign that says welcome in.
Yeah, fully agree. And it gives you that false sense of security that, well, if you're in the VPN, you don't need access control, you don't need authentication, you don't need anything. No, that's silly. So that's why, we really try to build our systems in with zero trust in mind. So this means we have to focus on access control. So all of our stuff is thankfully in the cloud. We don't have any on-prem things, no services, no data centers, nothing like that. So at least that part is a little bit better. And we focus on identity. So we use Octa for our identity services.
Can I ask you about Octa later?
Yeah, we can talk about that. So
okay.
That was definitely an interesting morning when we found about what happened to them. But anyway, so I'm a big believer of single sign-on. So we moved pretty much all our systems under Octa. So controlled with strong authentication, MFA, etc. And then the other piece is endpoint protection. So if you don't have an office network, well, you need to still deal with the endpoints, both on the server side and the client side. So, we have all our laptops managed with a central system, but we're using Jamfa. There's nothing secret about it, and we have endpoint protection on all of our computers. So,
what endpoint protection do you guys use? If you can say, if not, I get it.
Actually, I can talk about that a little bit because. When we rolled it out, we looked at multiple systems. We ended up using Sentinel-1 first, which worked great for a while, but we always wanted to, find something that's, since we're using Jamf, that's close to that. And so we just recently switched to Jamf Protect, which, by the way, about a year ago or 2 years ago, when we looked into endpoint protections, Jamf Protect was definitely not there, not in par with, like Carbon Black or Sentinel-1, but no, they're there. It's pretty neat. And, and all that data is going to our SIM system, and we're using that to build our alerting and
is your SIM internal or do you hire or do you outsource that to something like an MSSP?
No, it's internal. I don't really believe in MSSPs, to be honest. It can
scale.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's half, we do a lot of security on the managed services side, but I think if you're building a SIM system, you cannot build it for too many masters. You have to deal with one company, their specific needs. And if you have to introduce even one other company that you're going to be outsourced from, someone's not going to get what they want.
Yeah, exactly. I fully agree with that.
Now, tell me about Octa. When it happened, what was your first thought or response? And, maybe not to your team, but to yourself when you woke up that morning and you said, oh my God.
Yeah. And so, the immediate one was, well, oh my God, what just happened? What do we need to do? Do we need to, reset all our sessions? What do we need to do? And then, just calm down. Let's look through the facts. Let's try to understand what really happened there. And, how can we be impacted at all? Thankfully, after that, Octa's communication was actually pretty transparent. So they helped us to understand if we are impacted or not, and they're not. So that's a good sign. But on the other side, what really made me think is, well, how it could happen to Octa, a company that builds itself on security, right? So, and it was through that support tooling. So which actually triggered an internal audit that, okay, let's look through our own support tools and let's see where can we make adjustments, where can we make it tighter to avoid something like that, what happened to Octa. So it was actually kind of a good alarming call. It always good to look at, well, this happened to somebody else. How can we make sure that it doesn't happen to us?
So what type of meaningful change, if any, did the Octa incident have on you and Zapier? Did you make any actual changes?
Yeah.
Start new tabletops?
Yeah. So we're doing tabletops, but we didn't really pay too much attention or didn't do too much tabletops around our support tools. So that was one thing that we did. That, okay, let's imagine if this, something like this happened to us. How could they get in? What can they do? Are support personnel trained the right way? Do they have, the least amount of access? And that helped a lot to identify a couple of things that, okay, I think we can tie this screw a little bit tighter, right? So we did make a few changes. Thankfully, it wasn't anything, oh my God, we need to fix this right away. But it was definitely a good exercise, and we did tighten some of our systems down.
One of the things about the whole Octa situation, for the podcast, B, for running an MSP or being a technology provider, I wanted to know as much as I could possibly find out. We don't use it. We have clients that do use it. And there was a lot of, I don't want to say misinformation, but a lot of people shooting analysis from the hip without any real knowledge behind it, saying the hacker allegedly Lapsus had super user access, which was true in the sense that Superuser is the name of their support platform, right? But pinning this back to a 100% remote environment that you guys operate, and the fact that I think, and I could be wrong here, so if I'm wrong, whoever's in the comments, let me know. The support person, the access to their laptop was compromised. And basically being able to see what's on the screen and pull information off of what seemingly was a BYOD laptop or computer allowed them access to the Superuser platform of Octa that allowed them to traverse their systems. Is that a concern for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, that's again why I really focus on endpoint protection, because you cannot get into a network because we don't have a network, but you can, steal somebody's laptop. You can shoulder surf. You can, use, the rubber hose cryptanalysis.
Well, I'm happy you brought up, looking over the shoulder, because to me, that's, if you get access to a BYOD device, I guess, let me back up a little bit. Your team, are they all Zapier owned laptops or computers, or are there BYOD?
It's all Zapier owned. Of course, there are systems where you can access from like Slack and email. So there are things that we do allow to run on your own device, but nothing that's customer specific, especially not our support tools.
Okay. And so now that, you guys have been remote for so long, is there any type of SD-WAN, or is it just not needed?
No, it's not really needed, to be honest. And
one of the really cool things about Zapier, I mean, I've used it in a limited basis over the years, and I'm happy you're on, because one of my fears has always been, okay, I'm going to give you access to whatever API I'm using for whatever platform, which, it's the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah.
How do you guys assuage those fears for the big enterprises that use you guys?
Yeah, so we try to do that in a couple of ways. Well, one, definitely, a SOC 2 report does help when you have a third-party auditor to kind of going through your controls, and also that we do these red team exercises and penetration tests. Those reports do help to prove to build a solid message that we're doing the right things to keep your stuff secure. But on the technology side, I mean, without going into too much details, I think that was really fascinating for me when I found out, interviewing for this position, is that, obviously all those auth tokens or API keys that you give to Zapier in order to, integrate applications together. We do encrypt that. We have to store that encrypted, but of course we do need those API keys when we actually make the call, in behalf of you. So what was really fascinating is that whole code base that was doing, the encryption, the directed decryption when, it's for you, it's for your own call. It was all separated into a different code base, into different infrastructure. And it was actually owned by the security team. So within the security team, we have a few developers, and actually they are maintaining that piece of code. So we call it security kernel. And that's really a big relief, because it's always good to, have security control over the most important piece of code, instead of, relying on a product team that, might have different priorities.
Product is focusing on features,
yeah,
and security is not one of their features, but for your security team, that's the only feature, right?
Yes, exactly.
What type of access do Zapier employees have to, let's say I had an account and I had some automate some Zaps going or configure? What type of access do you guys have?
Yeah. So if you're not in the support team, then you don't really have access at all to customer accounts. If you are in support, there are multiple things. We can obviously look into your billing information, because that's what's needed for support. We can help you troubleshoot with your Zaps. So thankfully we only store. So Zap history is the most important, or the second most important piece of data that we have. Zap history is really stuff that flows through your Zaps, right? So, but we only store that data for 30 days. And if you're reaching out to support that, hey, I had a failure 31 days ago, then we cannot even look into that, not even our support team, because that data doesn't exist. I mean, that's kind of the best way to protect data, is not having it.
You're right. It's almost like the Signal approach, the messaging app. In preparation for you coming on today, I caught one previous podcast episode you did back in February, and you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting, and you can expound on this however you'd like. It's the transparency over at Zapier, and I believe you said the two things that stuck out to me were not many private messages. The entire company can see your entire Slack ecosystem, so to speak. More so, company financials are shared with everyone, or available to everyone.
Yeah, and of course, joining the company as the new head of security, that freaked the hell out of me, right? So, but then, when you join a company, you have to understand the company's values and utilize them instead of trying to swim against the current, right? I could come in and say that, oh, this is stupid. We need to lock down all the Slack channels. We need to lock down all the financial information. We're not going to do that. But this is part of our culture. This is part of our company values. So instead, I had to look at it through that angle. Okay, so transparency. What does that mean? So this means that we trust our employees that they don't do anything wrong with this piece of information. But then we can find the right balance of, well, you can have the company financial information if you're interested. We actually have a monthly readout when the financial team actually reads out to the whole company. This is where we are. This is where we're heading, and it really helps us, to feel that, what I'm doing is actually make a change. Make sense. We're going where we want to go, instead of hiding all that information and you have no idea how the company is doing. But we can still draw a line that, transparency or not, you will not be able to look into a random customer's account. Why would you do that? That's not part of transparency. That's just plain
insider threats.
Yeah, exactly. So why would you do that? We don't allow that. So there's even with transparency, there is a fine line that you can draw there. And the other piece is, using company values, using transparency as utilizing them for our own gain. So for example, when we rolled out, Jamf and endpoint protection, the immediate response from some folks who were security is putting spyware on my computer, and instead saying that, well, suck it up, we must do this. We went out of our way to be transparent that, okay, these are the things that we are going to capture from your laptop. These are the reasons why, and this is how we're going to use it. So with that, it again helped to ease that, and okay, that actually makes sense. So nobody really against that.
And that brings me to another point, and you mentioned in this previous podcast, I forget what the name of it was, but it was in February. I don't know if you remember which one it was.
I did a couple.
It was about 28 minutes long from what I can remember. But you were also speaking about policy building, where you invited staff members to comment on the policies and not slam them with a 253 page document that they're just like, no.
Yeah, that was fascinating again. So again, policies should be something that can guide you. Nobody reads policies for fun, right? But if you get lost, if you don't, well, can I use my mom's laptop to access, our customer system? Can I do that? Well, you can look into our policy and you see that, well, these are the things that you can do, and these are the things that you cannot do. In fact, you're not allowed to do. So a good policy can actually help you, guide you, instead of just being shelfware. So, but how can you get a policy that actually helps people is, getting feedback. That's another company value. That's the reason why I even, come up with the idea to share the policies with all the staff members. And that value is grow through feedback. So let's gather some feedback on these policies. What do you think? Does it make sense? Does it interfere with your day-to-day work? And, out of back then it was, almost 300 people, 260 something, and 150 actually commented in those policies. It was mind blowing, the engagement from folks. And with that, we were able to, make changes and build up a security policy that is actually aiding people.
So when you talk about security, are you talking about making it extra work for them to do things, or security bending to the culture? Or do you think you found a balance of both?
Well, of course, I try to believe that I did find a good balance. Of course, security doesn't come for free. We can gamify it. We can do fun things about it. We can use the company culture to sell it, but it doesn't come for free, right? So, developers have to go through basic security development training. They have to go through the SAST findings. They have to fix security bugs. So it doesn't come for free. With all that transparency, with all that, openness and explaining why are we doing this, it's a lot of work, obviously, on the security side. And, we could just say that these are the policies, these are the rules. No, go live with it. It's a lot of work to explain everything, to be transparent about it. But it really helps, because a security team, no matter how big they are, they cannot be everywhere. We need to rely on our employees. They do the right thing. They have the tools to do the right thing. And they are not afraid to reach out that, hey, I saw something suspicious. Maybe it's nothing, but take a look. Because, this is how security incidents happen. And the faster you can react to them is the better. Obviously the smaller the impact is. And you can only react fast to security incidents if you can rely on your employees that if they spot something, they will let you know. And so you can jump on it right away.
Now, in terms of security, I have this new project of mine, or maybe it's just I overthink too much. I don't want to have more than 5 agents, management and security agents, on a computer anymore. And my goal is, by the end of next year, have no more than 3. How many agents do you have on one of your laptops? Or what's the average number of agents you have on laptops? And what are they, other than, I guess, Jamf and Jamf Protect?
Those are the 2 things.
That's it?
Yep.
Now I'm envious.
Yeah, because it all depends. Both Jamf and Jamf Protect, they can gather a lot of information from those laptops. Sometimes you have to, use their APIs, because you might not have all that data from their UIs, but we are an API company, so it's kind of.
Well, I was just going to ask: what's Zapier doing for that type of security automation?
Yeah, so it's really, gathering, really two things. One is when we set up our Jamf and Jamf Protect rules, we do the first steps in the UI, and then roll it out, test it out. But once it's done, we really automate the whole thing and just use both Zapier, Octa workflows, and there are a couple other tools that we integrate with, and we use all that to automate the actual rule set that are going down to our laptops. And on the other way, gathering all that information, we also use automation to pull all that data and put it into our SIM system, where we have another layer of automation where we have a bunch of automated correlation rules that we built ourselves that just gathers different data together and put it into a one centralized correlated place.
But is Zapier doing that? Meaning are Zaps being used for this?
No.
Or is this outside of the Zapier ecosystem?
No, it's outside. We do use Zaps to do a couple things around security, but I intentionally wanted to move away from that as much as possible, because if we want to secure Zapier, our environment, then we cannot really rely on it, right, to secure it itself.
Oh, I 100% agree. This is one of the few instances where a company should not be eating their own dog food, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because it's just a compounded breach effect should something happen.
Yeah, exactly.
But what can Zapier do for me, as an IT service provider, or let's just say I was a CIO of a company, in terms of security automation?
So, Zapier is really an automation tool that connects all your apps together and with no code. Well, that's not true for more complicated systems like a SIM or an endpoint protection. You do have to use some code, but still within Zap there's a step that's called code step, where you can actually build pieces of API calls. So you still don't have to build up the whole environment, running those APIs somewhere, have on EC2 or something sitting in Amazon or anywhere, and then run your own code there. You can still, build that little piece of API call and integrate it into a Zap. So, for example, you can do something like, when, say a scheduled pull from one of your tools, every hour, let's say, you run an API call and that grabs all the data from your endpoint solution and you put it into an S3 bucket where your SIM can feed from, for example.
Okay. What are you guys, are you guys doing anything in terms of DLP, data loss prevention?
Yeah.
What are you doing there?
Yeah, the DLP is hard because, anybody can just take out their phone and take a photo of the screen. So it's really, really hard to do that. Also, what DLP is really about is mass data extraction, right? So you cannot prevent somebody, taking a page or 2 or 3 or 10, because they can just do that with their own phone. But you can at least focus on mass data extraction. And, tools like Octa or Google, which is our office system, basically, they do have really good tools to prevent, for data leak prevention. And
Why did you guys, sorry.
I was just saying, same as on the Amazon side.
Why did you guys choose Octa for your IDP and Google for your email as opposed to going what in my world, the typical route is Microsoft 365?
Well, I guess I can answer this in 2 ways. One is kind of boring. This is always how it was. So
that's the safest answer ever.
Yeah. So that's definitely part of it. And the other is, having Macs for our employees, and really living in the cloud. It didn't make sense not having an office, not needing an Active Directory or anything like that. It didn't really make sense to even consider, switching over to Office 365. So, but on the other hand, Google itself as an identity provider is not as powerful there are a bunch of things that you cannot do there. So that's why we wanted like an actual identity provider. That's why we moved to Octa.
Makes sense. And I mean, that's pretty much it for me as far as my questions go, unless you have anything else you'd like to discuss.
No, this was the thing. Thank you.
No, I appreciate you guys reaching out and wanting to come on. It's fantastic. When we go offline, I have one question that I want to ask you in terms of compliance. But again, I'd like to thank Attila for coming on from Zapier. If the people wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that? If you even want to hear from them.
Sure. You can reach out to me to our, my Zapier email. Given that we don't use emails at Zapier, so I might not answer you right away, but I'm happy to talk.